Welcome back to On the Move with Victor Shi. This is Victor Shi. It is Thursday, April 6th, 2023, and today we're going to talk about young voters because, as all of you have heard me say many times on this show, we turned out in droves in 2018, 2020, and again in 2022. And then on top of all of that, as I mentioned to you yesterday, young voters turned out in unprecedented numbers on Tuesday for the Wisconsin Supreme Court race, helping Democrats flip control of the Wisconsin Supreme Court for the first time in 15 years. Today, we're going to unpack all of the amazing things we've seen from young people so far, and especially this week, our growing political power, and what must happen between now and 2024 to make sure we get as many young people voting as possible. And to help me do that, I'm grateful to be joined by someone who you've likely seen on Twitter as Biden's Win, or he has a bunch of other Twitter accounts too. But Biden's Wins is huge on Twitter, and he's my friend and fellow Illinoisan from the 10th Congressional District, Ethan Wolf. Ethan, it's so great to see you. Thanks so much for joining me this morning.
Hey, Victor, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here and discuss young voter issues.
Of course. So there's so much to discuss, but I want to start off by asking you about this latest election we had in Wisconsin, which to me, on every level, was incredible. Young people across the state turned out, and in many areas, what we know so far is youth voter turnout near that of 2022, the midterm, and more than 80% of young voters in some areas as well cast their vote for Janet Protasiewicz. I'm wondering, how do you read what happened in Wisconsin and some of the top line takeaways for Democrats?
For sure. I think we saw an enthusiastic young voter demographic in Wisconsin, and I think that comes from a variety of reasons. Last night, my family actually had a Passover Seder, and the big story of Passover is this story of Exodus and freedom, leaving slavery and entering their freedom. And I think when we talk to young voters, we see a sort of similar story. It's about freedom and democracy. And the freedom has to do with reproductive rights, the freedoms to be who you are, identify who you are, and love who you want, and ultimately to preserve American democracy. And we've seen assaults on those three fronts from the Republican Party and Republican judiciaries throughout the country. So I think young voters have seen these attacks and have been incredibly enthusiastic to get out and support candidates that are going to push back, are going to support LGBTQ plus rights, are going to support reproductive freedoms, and are going to support democracy at all costs.
Absolutely. Well, it seems like, I mean, you mentioned reproductive rights and democracy, and those were the two kind of main drivers of this election, at least for Judge Protasiewicz. I mean, she really ran her campaign on abortion rights as well as democracy, which, aren't, I guess, traditional kitchen table issues, but proved to be very much kitchen table issues. So I'm wondering, I mean, what do you think is the right messaging for Democrats heading into 2024, especially, and what we can learn from Wisconsin in terms of how we talk about politics to young voters?
So we're in this really unique stage in Congress right now where the Republicans have control of the House, Democrats control the Senate, and the executive branch with the president. And so not a whole lot is going to get done. There's going to be a lot of political posturing. And I think like those issues, reproductive freedoms, because of what the right-wing Supreme Court did in overturning Roe v. Wade in the Dobbs decision, those issues are still going to be relevant. And so voters are going to still need to hear about what Democrats are going to do to codify Roe v. Wade into law. And I think that's going to be a big talking point. And I think, as we can see throughout this Republican presidential primary, all points indicate it's going to be Trump. Yeah. So the issue of democracy is still on the ballot because Trump and people that supported Trump are still running for office. So if you're a Democrat, and in particular, you're a young voter, you need to hear about those issues, and they got to be, right in front every day, making sure that voters hear about that. Yeah. And so I'll leave it there.
I mean, I know one of the ways that we talked a lot about this off the line, but you've been thinking a lot about digital strategy as well and how we can reach young voters. Tell our audience more about that.
Yeah. So Victor, you and I have had these conversations a lot, but I think it's important to meet voters where they're at. Yeah. And right now we're in a space, right now we're on StreamYard. This is a platform, and we're broadcasting to YouTube, going to go on Twitter, all the different spaces. And basically we're meeting voters where they're at. We're not on CNN, we're not on MSNBC, we're not on Fox. And that's really because, we're trying to meet young voters where they're at. They're on TikTok, they're on Twitter, they're on Instagram. And these platforms with individual content creators are taking over modern media as we know it. And that transition's only going to grow in the future. So Democrats and frankly Republicans, if you're being strategic, you need to be thinking about ways that you can get your content, your message on platforms where the voters are.
I mean, talk more about social media in that sense, because I think there's so much that social media can do for in terms of educating, mobilizing young voters. I know you're very active on Twitter with Biden's wins and really highlighting the accomplishments of Democrats. But how are you using social media as a way and as a tool to really speak to young voters in a way that maybe other people aren't?
For sure. So I also do a little bit of TikTok, but I think the key is to take really complex information, boil it down into a concise and digestible uh, message, and make sure it's shareable. And that's something that I did with Biden's wins. I took information, things that the president was doing, whether it was legislative victories in the Inflation Reduction Act or the Chips and Science Act or judicial appointments. And I just wanted to say, here's what's being done. Here's why that's a win and why we
Yeah.
need to celebrate that. And I think if you're able to convey that message and you're not only telling people the things that you've accomplished, you're building political capital to accomplish the next objective.
Yeah.
And so I think that's, a really important thing for Democrats to be doing. And being on social media is just a unique way to take complex information and make it really small, make it really shareable, make it go viral.
So one of the questions that I'm asked all the time, and I think you would have a much better way of saying this than I would, but one of the things that I always get asked is from older people, and they ask, what can they be doing to help, spread the message about young people and help really uplift youth voices? What do you say to those old people wondering, or older people wondering, how they can be an ally for Gen Z and just help us in our political kind of power?
So I think there's a number of ways that older generations can be, helpful. I think number one, amplify the voices of Gen Z. If you see Gen Z individuals getting excited about politics and public service, amplify that.
Yeah.
Give them a pat on the back. Tell them they're doing something right. Because at the end of the day, we need to be encouraging people to be civically engaged. And so younger generations in the past have lagged behind. Obviously, we've seen, increased turnout in 2018, 2020, 2022, as you mentioned, but we need to keep that up. So I'm hoping that older generations will continue to work with younger generations, amplify their message, and overall get excited about what young people are doing because things are changing in this country. And I think a lot of young people have a lot of really good ideas. So, older generations, be on the lookout and be ready to support us.
Absolutely. The last topic I want to talk to you about is 2024 because President Biden has not officially announced that he's running for president, but it seems like every indication leads that he will announce his run for president soon. And when that happens, and I guess in the coming weeks and months, how do you hope, or how do you think that Democrats should frame and sell President Biden in a way that kind of feels exciting for young voters? Because we saw this in 2020. There was this kind of famous Instagram page where it was like "settle for Biden." There doesn't seem to be a lot of kind of enthusiasm for President Biden, even though he does do a lot of things that really help our lives.
So I think it's an entirely different ball game than in 2020. In
Yeah.
2020, President Biden was, leaving a primary where he was not the most progressive candidate. And this isn't to say that young voters are the most progressive individuals. I think that that's like a broad overstroke of where young voters truly are. But I think President Biden left that midterm or that primary and was a little bit battle tested, certainly from Senator Sanders, and had to come up with a different message. And I think the Settle for Biden team did a really nice job
Yeah.
making sure that, what happened in 2016 when Sanders voters stayed home didn't happen again. And so I tip my hat to that crew, and I have a ton of respect for them. I think, in 2024, it's an entirely different ballgame. We've seen the president be pragmatic, but we've also seen him be incredibly progressive. We've seen him pass the most significant legislation to combat climate change in American history in the Inflation Reduction Act. We've seen him go toe to toe with Republicans and basically call them out for, frankly, their bullshit on reproductive rights.
Yeah.
And we've seen him be a friend to the LGBTQ plus community. So, the issues that young voters care about, I think the president has stood up and been a progressive leader on those fronts. And so when it comes to 2024, I don't think there's this settle for Biden movement, because I think the president has earned the trust of so many individuals inside the young community. And that's going to be a huge benefit for him. I really think that 2024 is going to be about the three issues we've mentioned: reproductive rights, democracy, a strong economy, and LGBTQ plus rights for young voters. And the president's winning on those messages right now. So he can continue to do that for the next year and a half. I think we're going to be looking at a 2024 reelect of the president.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of getting young people to be excited about President Biden, I think one of the pretty extraordinary things that doesn't really get a lot of attention is how, I mean, there's so much that's happening within the White House to really kind of elevate youth voices and try to reach that audience. Can you shed light about that and kind of what you think President Biden has done well and maybe different compared to other presidents when it comes to actually wanting to listen to and reach young people?
100%. For the first time in American history, there's an Office of Digital Strategy in the White House. And that Office of Digital Strategy has invited me and so many other young individuals into the White House to meet with influential stakeholders, to hear what are the things that are going on. Where are the limits on the issues that we're pushing? What can be done to benefit the young people in this country? So I think that's been a big step. Additionally, the White House held the Youth Communities Day in Action, where young people from all across the country were from different organizations that were, amplifying and advocating for young people, were invited. And we're invited not only to sit and listen to influential people, but we're invited to take part in conversations and share our policy ideas. And I think, like, when it comes to, leading and feeling included, it starts with an open ear. And I think this administration has really heard, the folks from our generation, and has started to implement the things that we want to see implemented.
Yeah.
Obviously, student debt loan cancellation is a big initiative for this administration that they're working on right now. Again, being held up by Republican courts. So, I think there's a lot to be proud of from this administration, and it's like totally ironic that it's coming from President Biden, who everyone was like, he's too old to run for office. But some of the people most excited to get him reelected are people like me who are 23.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, 2024 is going to be such an interesting time, and we're going to need as many yous as possible spreading that message and amplifying the perspectives of young people. Ethan, it's always great to see you, and thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Thank you, Victor. Appreciate your time.
Thanks so much. Well, I think Ethan nailed it on the head with everything he said about just how we reach young people and why we're so important in this political moment. There's a couple of things I want to get to before I let you all go. The first thing is a bit of shocking, honestly, like jaw-dropping reporting from the Supreme Court, or actually it was reported by ProPublica, which is a great independent local kind of investigative journalism organization. And it's such an amazing piece that I think it's disturbing on every level. So Justice Clarence Thomas, who I'm sure all of you are aware of, he's been doing frequent trips, according to this piece, with billionaire Republican donor Harlan Crow and his friends during the summers. And it kind of details just the amount of money that he was able to take in from these Republican groups and these Republican donors like Harlan Crow. And it's just kind of staggering. I have a couple of quotes that I think really capture this problem. First is quote, Crow's access to the justice extends to anyone the businessman chooses to invite along. Thomas frequently vacations at Top Ridge have brought him into contact with corporate executives and political activists. During just one trip in July 2017, Thomas's fellow guests included executives at Verizon and PricewaterhouseCoopers, major Republican donors, and one of the leaders of the American Enterprise Institute, a pro-business conservative think tank, according to records reviewed by ProPublica. And then there was some additional reporting saying that Thomas and others, and because of Crow, basically, quote, kind of fully paid for resort. And the top bridge shows him in conversation with Leonard Leo, who I'm sure all of us know as the Federal Society leader, regarded him as an architect of Supreme Court's recent turn to the right. Access to the justice extends to anyone the businessman chooses to invite along. And there are pictures of Clarence Thomas with all of these mega donors at these resorts and these luxurious spas. And then the last thing that really stood out to me was, quote, Thomas's frequent vacations at Top Ridge have brought him into contact with corporate executives and political activists. I mentioned that, and just kind of this staggering number of gatherings with friends and billionaires, and the hospitality that the Thomases have been able to really afford over these past few years as Supreme Court justices. It's just shocking on all levels that this is what's happening inside the Supreme Court. It's insane. It is revolting. For anyone who cares about what's happening inside the Supreme Court, this is what's happening. The problem is coming from within. And for anyone who cares about ethics, for anyone who cares about, Supreme Court justices still having some sort of moral code, this should be extremely concerning. We should not allow this to be happening in our Supreme Court because, at the end of the day, the rule of law should be still intact. And we can't have Supreme Court justices who are basically compromised from the right wing to rule on decisions that, the right wing wants. And so it's concerning on all levels. And, that was just shocking. If you haven't checked it out, please check that piece out in ProPublica. It was just really amazing. And I think ProPublica is doing tremendous work, and just a kind of another example of why we should be supporting our investigative journalist organizations. They're doing truly groundbreaking work. And this one is just another example of that. So if you have any money to donate to them, they're doing really amazing work. And this story, I think, is going to be one that we're going to be talking about for a long, long time, because the Supreme Court is not above anyone else. A couple of other things I want to mention: some disturbing news yesterday. Kansas Republicans overrode the governor's veto and basically authorized a law that would inspect the genitals of any transgender child if they want to play in sports today. Again, another indication of just this kind of assault on young people. This is how basically our Republicans are treating children. It's gross. It's despicable. I have no words to describe just how kind of low Republicans are going. And I think for anyone who cares about children, this is what Republicans are doing. Imagine if this was your child who wants to play a sport, and before they can play a sport, they're going to inspect their genitals. It's sick. I mean, this is what the Republican Party is doing, and I just can't. I cannot emphasize enough that this, and they're not going to change. I mean, they're never going to learn. This is what they are all about, and they're showing us exactly who they are, and we need to be paying attention, because if we don't, then they're going to be able to go even further than this if they win more office in 2024. So we have to turn out and vote in 2024 and vote these people out. This is what's happening on the down ballot levels, those state and local level races. That's what Republicans are really hijacking, and this is what they're able to do. It's sickening, and we should all be paying attention to this. And one last thing that I thought was pretty interesting. Yesterday, Mike Pence announced that he will not be appealing a subpoena made by Special Counsel Jack Smith to testify about his role on January 6th. There were some privilege claims here, and the judge seemed to give him a partial victory. But basically, this paves the way for Mike Pence to testify to Jack Smith about his role on January 6th. Again, kind of bad news for Donald Trump. People are testifying, and this is kind of at the top of the totem pole if you think about it. I mean, this is pretty significant. So we'll see what happens in that case. But Jack Smith and other cases are rolling full steam ahead, and they are not slowing down anytime soon. Tomorrow, I'll be back with another episode of On the Move. You do not want to miss it, because I'll be joined by Rick Wilson of the Lincoln Project. He'll join me to talk about all of this Republican craziness and how to make sense of it. And you do not want to miss that. He's been very, very loud on social media these days, and I want to get his thoughts on everything that's happening. So you don't want to miss that. It'll be live tomorrow at 8 a.m. Pacific time, 11 a.m. Eastern time, right here on youtube.com/Politicon. Don't miss it. Be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And thank you, everyone, again, for listening or watching. I'm grateful for your support. I'm grateful for your tuning in. And I will see you all tomorrow. Have a great rest of your Thursday.